Hi, I'm Morgan. I'm the creator of the Dream Project animation nodes for ComfyUI. And this video is about one of the latest additions to that node pack, and that is the concept of palettes and how you can use them for controlling colors in a deform-like animation. So this flow here exists in the repository. It's the most advanced example that we have in the repository. I had a video recently where I went through this flow, but at that point it did not contain a connection here for the noise input on the image motion. So this whole block here that exists to generate that noise did not exist. And the problem with that flow was that with this source image or seed image that I used, it would often get too dark after a while. So after you have generated 150 frames or so, it would clearly be a lot darker than the initial seed image every time I generated a video based on it. And that kind of process issues where imperfections or problems with the way you generate next frame are amplified over time are common when you're trying to generate something deformed-like. It's less of a problem when you're doing a video-to-video process, because in that case you're controlling from something that is more stable, and you can follow more of the input colors and movement. But if you're going something that is completely generated, so it's just base your current frame on what you had your previous frame and the input prompt, then any kind of imperfection is likely to amplify over time. So if the process yields darker images, it's going to get really dark after a while. If the process yields bright images, it's going to get really bright after a time. So what you need to do is have something in place to stabilize the process, and that exists in the forum. They have something called for colors, they have something called color coherence. So you can select that your image should follow the colors of your seed image, for instance. And here I've introduced palettes that help you with the same problem. But I prefer the way it's sold here over the way it's sold in the forum, and I'll show you why. So the idea is that we generate noise, but the noise that we generate is based on the last frame that we had, but adjusted for a target color or a reference image that we want to reach in terms of colors. So these nodes here will sample 4 different areas of the 2 images. One is the reference image, or the seed image in this case, and one is the last frame. And then from that they create palettes that one is the palette of the previous frame, the other is the palette of the seed image that we want to maintain, and then we have an alignment factor. So this is sort of how much we nudge the palette in the direction of the target. These 4 different palettes then are used to generate noise with a noise image that has different areas. And with that, we can have, for instance, one side of the image being dark and another side of the image being brighter. We could have a horizon and a sky, and the noise could follow that pattern. So you see here in the old pattern, where in the old flow, when we did not have this noise, this image here would be all black in this area. We are masking this area and in-painting it. And in that case, if it's black, then we would be in-painting with a denoise of 1. In this case, we have introduced noise that fits into the image, so we don't need to denoise quite as much. We can use some of the color information that we have introduced. And with that, we get this feedback that each time we introduce new areas into the image, the colors of those areas will be based on a kind of target palette that we want to reach. And as we introduce new areas all the time, and this process of sampling is done every time, we get something that, although it might contain sequences or parts of the sequence that are darker, as soon as we get into one of those darker sequences and we start panning, we are going to pan into brighter areas. It's going to generate palettes with brighter areas and noise that is brighter, so that it evens out over time. If you compare this to the deform-like process, in deform you're saying that we want all of our frames to have the same color profile as the seed image. It's not quite the same. We can allow for a bit more variation when we introduce the colors in the noise, and they're just introduced as we are panning. The drawback of this is that if we are not panning or zooming out, so we don't introduce new areas to in-paint, this process won't work. If we are just zooming into the picture, then we need to do something that controls the full image. We can't just rely on the noise that we introduce on the sides. So I'm going to open a different workflow here to just show how these new nodes work. And I'm going to open a test image. So this test image has 9 different areas with colors, and that corresponds to these area samplers. Each of these samplers can sample one of these areas, so top left, top center, top right, and so on. So with 9 different samplers and 9 areas that contain only one color, these are going to generate palettes that contain only one color. And in the next step, we generate noise from that palette. And since it's only one color, the noise is going to be fairly dull, but that's intentional in this case. Here at the end, though, we have a noise from area palettes. And this is something where we have 9 different inputs, all of them optional. We only need to connect one to have something that actually works. But it's more interesting if you have more than one connection. You can see here that this noise image here clearly corresponds to this image. I'll remove the blur because it's easier to see what happens then. And here you can see that the distribution of the noise. We have this parameter here that is the area sharpness. So if we set that to 1, you can see that we get noise that is fairly similar to the original image here. Or rather the 9 different areas. So red doesn't bleed very much into the yellow area and so on. It's still random though. Each time I generate, it's going to be slightly different. And this randomness is also really important to us when we're introducing this as noise in the deform process. So if I set the area sharpness to 0, that's going to give us well, there are no clearly defined areas. So what we have here is more or less just a combination of these 9 different palettes. And of course, different each time we generate it. In typical use case, maybe you want an area sharpness around this. So you can clearly see here that it follows a pattern, but there's a lot of randomness. So it's a good source of introducing new areas into an image. So let's pull up some nicer looking image here. And if we generate from that, can see how the noise clearly corresponds to the image that we have here. And with some blur added to it, this is just excellent to introduce along the edges if you want to outpaint. You can also see that these individual noise generators here are more interesting when we have something that is not only a single color in the area. So a more typical image is naturally going to give us noise that is that looks better. Yeah. So if you look at this noise, for instance, you have a lot of colors here from whatever area this is. Let's have a look. It's the bottom center, so that's this area. So this is how we sample different areas of a reference image and our previous frame, and we calculate noise along the edges that are introduced for our in-painting, out-painting process. But we also introduce it in such a way, or we adjust the palettes so that they not only look like the previous frame, but they will actually overshoot in the direction of our reference image, our target. And with that, if our previous frame was actually fairly dark, it's going to nudge it towards introducing brighter areas along the edges, and do it in a fairly natural way, so it doesn't look at all strange in most cases when we pan, for instance. So this is obviously a concept that could be used in many different ways, and I think one way to use it is to just copy colors from an image and use them as input for generating images in a specific color with specific gradients, for instance. So it's not necessarily something that you use only for animations. Animations is, of course, my reason for having them in the pack, but I think they are more general than that. You can use them to introduce interesting effects in just about any image. So that's it. Thanks for listening, and I hope this is useful to you. Bye.